This is Chris Hedges, and you're listening to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour.
Stand up, you've been sitting way too long.
Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. My name is Steve Scrovan, along with my co-host David Feldman. Hello, David.
Hello, Steve.
And our producer, Hannah Feldman. Hello, Hannah.
Hello, Steve.
And the man of the hour, Ralph Nader. Hello, Ralph.
Hello, we're getting questions and comments and information from you today, listeners, and more than one of them is going to provide material for the Capitol Hill Citizen.
That's right, Ralph. We're going to devote today's entire program to your listener questions and comments. We're going to go through a whole raft of them. Ralph is going to comment. It'll spur some discussion with us. And as always, somewhere in the middle, we'll check in with our tireless corporate crime reporter, Russell Mokhiber. But first, let's get right to it. And I'll start with our first question that goes, hello, Mr. Nader. I live near the U.S. contractor, U.S. security firm UG Solutions in North Carolina. They are part of the notorious Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. In recent weeks, Palestinians have been lured into these aid sites and slaughtered in daily massacres. As of my writing this, over 400 people have been killed. My question is, who are private security firms answerable to? Are there any better or any worse than boots on the ground? What tools do citizens have to rein them in or seek justice for wrongs committed? I am devastated at the thought of my neighbors having a role in this genocide. GHF, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, out of Gaza. Palestinians need legitimate aid. That comes from Andrew Acosta in North Carolina. So, Ralph, what do you say to that?
Well, it speaks for itself, Andrew, your statement. There is no remedy here because they are part of a contracting system that's been given the approval by our government. They may be required under a different kind of administration to file as foreign agents under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, but the Trumpsters are not going to enforce that at all. So it all comes down to impeachment and removal from office by the U.S. Congress. That's the only accountability mechanism left. Trump is not worried about the courts, and he's not worried about public opinion against him, but he cannot control the impeachment authority that our founding fathers invested in our U.S. Congress. And since you wrote this, Andrew, far more Palestinians have been killed.
Our next question from Dave Wenland.
Ralph and Company, love your show and promote and listen to it every week on WDRT.org in Viroqua, Wisconsin. My question, considering that the U.S. military is running roughshod over the majority of Americans who don't want these endless wars and military aggression, isn't it time to start calling our form of government what it really is? A military dictatorship. Thanks, Dave Wenland.
Under Trump, that's exactly what's emerging. All he needs now is to invoke the Insurrection Act to make it complete.
Have you ever seen anything close to this, Ralph? I mean, you obviously are around during Nixon. It doesn't seem like anything's ever come close to this.
Nothing's come close.
And why do you think that is? What is it about this moment that makes it ripe for somebody like Trump to arise?
I think two factors. One is whole generations of American voters have been raised on television and more recently iPhones. They don't have as much experience in going to public engagements and council meetings and the various town meetings and so forth, because they don't learn anything about civics. The computers replace civics in the classroom, and we know what that means. So if they don't know what their own rights are, they are given no experience in the elementary and high school local civic endeavors with adult guidance. You get more and more voters vulnerable to just what comes out of a politician's mouth. Remember, everything Trump has achieved politically has come out of his mouth, not out of his deeds, just out of his mouth. Repeatedly, unrebutted largely over the mass media and faithfully relayed to the American people by a supine media, which points out his mistakes once in a while, but it was too little too late. The second and most important reason is the failure of the Democratic Party. Truman, FDR, Kennedy, they would have landslided this corrupt, arrogant, corporate, self-enriching, ignorant, GOP in history. There's nothing can compare since 1854 with the level that the GOP has descended. There shouldn't even be in contention. So the responsibility very heavily on the Democratic Party that contracts out its campaigns, the corporate conflicted consulting firms that has cut its roots in the progressive labor movement, cut its roots in the progressive citizen movement, and basically refuses to have its leadership quit when they lose again and again and infuse it with not young, dynamic talent, some of whom are already knocking on the bureaucratic doors of the Democratic National Committee.
Well, that's what occurs to me is that because the people voting for Trump are not necessarily the young people. It is older people trying to hang on to whatever they have. And there's this what's called the neoliberal economic order of free trade deals that has caused such a gap in income that working class people no longer can dream that their kids will be better off than they are. And that seems to be what Trump is able to play on, is that discontent.
Yeah, but would he be able to play on it if the Democratic Party authentically pressed for raising the minimum wage to $15 from $7.25 federal? That's 25 million workers with more food on the table, able to pay their rent. They would be less susceptible to Trump's lies and false promises. Would the elderly vote for Trump if the Democrats followed Congressman John Larson's lead and increased Social Security benefits frozen for 45 years? That's over 60 million people would get more money that they've deserved and not gotten over the years because of the Democratic Party. But no, you can't do these things if you're a political party that contracts out your campaigns, money-raising strategies, tactics, schedules, language to corporate consulting firms, which I have been trying to get the media to investigate and report on, and they just won't do it. They spend all kinds of articles in the Times and Post on internal bickering inside the Democratic Party. That's just reporting political gossip. That's here today, gone tomorrow. They have to talk about agenda, shifts of power, justice, injustice, authentic campaigning, who you get your money from.
All right, very good. Hannah, why don't you take the next listener comment?
This next comment is from James D'Amico. He writes, "Dear Ralph, my best to you and Claire. I wanted to let you know that I'm using civic self-respect in a graduate seminar this summer. The students are primarily classroom teachers or school administrators. Here's a description of the two options for the final assignment. 1, develop a curriculum unit, at least 3 lessons, or an extended workshop that integrates critical literacy and civic self-respect for a specific audience, for example, K through 12 students, administrators, or other adult learners. Or 2, analyze a current policy or platform, for example, AI regulation, data privacy laws, digital citizenship education, through the lenses of critical literacy and civic self-respect." That's from Professor James D'Amico from Indiana University's School of Education.
Thank you, Hannah. And by the way, when he refers to civic self-respect, he's referring to my new book. It's called Civic Self-Respect, and it's very personal. It deals with people's daily roles. The table of contents illustrates that. It starts with I, the citizen, I, the taxpayer, I, the consumer, I, the worker, I, the veteran, I, the parent, and in many ways relates to everybody in the country, how they can become civically effective just by adding to the things they do every day as workers, consumers, taxpayers, voters, and so on. But I was astonished, my friends on this panel, how disinterested the American people are in empowering themselves. That's the problem we have. The lack of civic motivation, the lack of saying, look, we're giving our power to only 535 people in the Congress, and they've turned it against us on behalf of some 1,500 corporations. We're going to turn it around. We're the sovereign power. As I said 100 times, the Constitution starts with we the people, not we the Congress or we the corporations. And the people don't seem to want to focus on that. If they had anyone in their neighborhood and community who were treating them the way Congress is treating them, as voters, as workers, as consumers, as parents, as children, as taxpayers, they would never allow it. And it's the great puzzle that the political scientists in this country have never been able to resolve as to why the American people are not fervently determined to control Congress 365 days a year. It's their arm, and it's their way to a great life and livelihood and safety and health, or to hazards, corruption, deprivation, and injustice.
Thanks for that, Ralph. Our next question comes from listener Ted, who says, what vehicles today qualify for unsafe at any speed? To be more precise, we have vehicles exploding, catching fire. Who is leading the fight to get these off the road until they are safe?
Well, it may surprise you, Ted, that the differential between vehicles in terms of safety is a lot less than it was in the 1960s, when you had the Volkswagen Bug and the GM Corvair way out in terms of comparative safety with other models on the road. And the reason why is federal standards have sandpapered a lot of the differences. They all have to have seatbelts now. They all have to have airbags. They all have to have collapsible steering columns, rollover protection, padded dash panels, head restraints, and so forth. Now, having said that, there are problems that you pointed out. There are electric cars catching fire, for example, and there are other problems that should be the subject of recall by the Department of Transportation, and do recall some of them, but they've had a lot of trouble dealing with the tons of millions of cars with the Takata airbag, the exploding Takata airbag. Imagine that. And that's still not been totally resolved. They've had recalls, but it's a very slippery situation there. The company's gone bankrupt, by the way, Takata. But having said all that, the reference to your question would be the Center for Auto Safety in Washington, D.C., a group called Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety, Washington, D.C., and freelance safety advocate Byron Block often registers focused attention on some of the defects that he has documented as an expert witness in court trials. And he is out of Potomac, Maryland.
Yeah, I talked a lot to Byron when I was interviewing people for An Unreasonable Man.
Ralph, from a practical standpoint, I always tell people to go to NHTSA.gov because you can look up, use your VIN for your car, and you can look up active recalls and any other issues that the dealer might be required to repair for you free of charge. So there's official recalls you might get notified about, but then there's other issues that I don't think people are as aware of, that a lot of my friends are surprised when I tell them they could get these repairs done for free. And NHTSA.gov has that info.
And also there are the lemon laws, the Moss-Magnuson warranty laws, which if you buy a new car and it has bugs in it or defect, you bring it back to the dealer more than once or so, they're going to have to fix it free. But just look it up, you'll get the details. Every state, possibly with one or two exceptions, has a state lemon law as well that you should follow.
Just to remind the listeners, NHTSA, the formation of that agency, was a direct response to Ralph's work that came out of Unsafe at Any Speed and the auto safety laws. And you may not know the answer to this question, Ralph, but in all of the cutting with Doge and whatever, and the dismantling of the administrative state, have they gone after NHTSA?
Well, I haven't read much, but they don't really have to, because the budget is so minuscule under Biden and Obama and Bush that it probably wasn't even on their radar.
No.
They are cutting into mass transit funds, however, and they enjoy punishing New York City on that score for obvious reasons. Trump.
Right.
This next question comes to us, or statement comes to us, from Miriam Gennari, and she writes, "Good day, Mr. Nader. I am a supporter, a journalist, and a mother. You may remember hearing about Styrofoam Mom, or the Arlington Weekly News, where our paths crossed in 2016 at Busboys and Poets. I own the URL greenteaparty.org. I would like to utilize that site as a salon for community building. I believe together we can catch a moment and release it in a way that inspires change through community building events. I teach media literacy and understanding communication with neurodivergent individuals. I recently dissolved the nonprofit Sustainables Co-op, but still own the URL and have access to the YouTube channel. I am commonly referred to as Styrofoam Mom. Please contact if you would like to speak. As a media professional, I am happy to support your efforts with resources from our media library. Thank you and good day, Miriam Gennari.
Well, it speaks for itself, doesn't it? Thank you, Miriam, and just keep at it and try to multiply your efforts with your friends in the neighborhood and community.
All right, it's not really a question, it's a comment, and it says, it comes from Nancy Liza, who's a regular listener. I simply adore listening to Francesco DeSantis every week. Please tell him for me. Thank you. And she says, I've been listening weekly for years. Your show is the smartest podcast on the internet. Hannah asks great questions. She has a sharp mind. That's from Nancy Liza. And she pointedly does not mention either me or David, which fair enough, Nancy.
She's a lot more astute than she gives herself credit for.
That's right. So that's a shout out to the staff that works on the show, especially behind the scenes. Hannah not only asks great questions, but she does a lot of our editing and all the other production work that goes into putting the show together. As long as we're talking about it, you hear about them in the credits, but Matthew Marin books all the guests, which sometimes is an incredible task, coordinating, getting everybody here for us. And Jimmy Lee Wirt, as you know, those listeners know Jimmy. He does the actual physical editing, does the graphics for the website. And we also have Elizabeth Solomon, who proofreads all the transcripts of the radio versions of the show. So we really appreciate all of their efforts. That we've been doing this for over 11 and a half years now. And this happens to be episode 603. So that's a tribute to also, Ralph, your Lou Gehrig Iron Man devotion. So,
Steve, I really thank you for acknowledging the effort of all of these good people who make the show possible.
All right, very good. Enough of tooting our own horn. Let's get back to the good stuff. Hannah, you're up.
I mean, toot away. Who am I to silence your tooting?
Let's see. You can answer. You ask sharp questions. Let's see if you can read a sharp question.
Okay. Dear Ralph, assuming scarce resources and networks, how to start a public policy watchdog as a lone investigator or agent, including securing initial and maintaining recurrent funding, specifically looking at European policy implementation nationally. How about crowdsourcing? Many thanks. Best regards from Europe, Sunny Basumi.
Well, thank you for your question. I just don't know enough about the European situation to answer. Generically, I would urge you to find some group that has an affinity to your civic pursuits and learn from what they have to suggest at the community level that you're working on. And also go to the internet and find out if there are lone advocates that have broken through like you want to, and you can learn from their experiences.
All right, very good. Thank you for that question, Sony. This next one, David, you're going to take, and also we enlisted the aid of Bruce Fine to give us a very short answer to this question. So, David, why don't you take Dave Buchanan from Toronto, Ontario?
Hello, Ralph. Love your show. I was wondering, has the case presented to the International Court of Justice by South Africa been regularly updated with new accounts of atrocities? If so, it would now seem to be a slam dunk. Or does it have to rest on its initial presentation of facts? Thank you for all your hard work. Dave Buchanan, Toronto, Ontario. And we did get a response from Bruce Fine, and he says the ICJ entertains supplementary evidence of genocide in Gaza after its preliminary finding. The final hearing on the merits is at least 18 months down the road. That's from Bruce Fine, our resident constitutional scholar.
Thank you for that, Bruce. Our next question comes from Anthony Killian Bainey from Tonawanda, New York. I think that's outside of Buffalo. He says, hello, Ralph. I have contacted all House of Representative offices that are not co-sponsors of the Medicare for All bill, H.R. 3069. Many offices refuse to provide an email address for a legislative director or legislative assistant. A lot of them are saying that they are prohibited from giving out email addresses. Some refuse to give out a name for the legislative staff, or even some refuse to even give their first name or even just initials. I'm being polite. And he found this website for ethics, or thehouse.gov. And he says, are we really prohibited from getting legitimate contact to members of Congress and legislative staffers to discuss legitimate proposed legislation? Members of Congress travel to Israel, a country with universal health care, but will not discuss proposed national health care policy with U.S. citizens? Is this constitutional? Aren't we guaranteed a Republican form of government under Article 4, Section 4? Keep up all the hard work and kindest regards, Anthony Killian Bainey.
Thank you, Anthony. This is a very valuable feedback that we're going to have the Capitol Hill Citizen follow up on. You're showing us that it's even worse than we thought. Congress collectively is starting to move into a cocoon where the keys to the door are only in the possession of commercial lobbyists or other types of special interests, not the citizens and the voters back home. There's an increasing number of members of Congress are locking the door on their office inside the Senate and House office buildings, which are obviously very well guarded and under all kinds of security. But you have to phone them outside the glass door of their office in order to be let in. So this is basically destroying our First Amendment right to petition our government. If you can't connect, you don't need censorship. You just need an obstruction and an inability to connect with members of Congress or their staff. And it's getting worse and worse because people are not mobilizing and demanding that it be reopened again. If any institution of government should be open, it should be the U.S. Congress. So when these members go back and campaign in their lengthy recess periods for a re-election, raise the issue and have them write you in print an assurance that they are going to respond to serious inquiries about legislation such as yours, and they're going to respond by telephone, and they're going to respond by writing letters. They don't have to pay stamps. They're going to respond in any way you expect them and ask them to respond. So listeners, this is exactly what we want our listeners to do. Obviously, Anthony's had to spend quite a bit of time to call the representatives in the House of Representatives who are not co-sponsors. He's had to call over 220 members of Congress at least who are not co-sponsors. And look at the detail he can now give us. So bravo to you, Anthony, in Tonawanda, New York. And just contact us, Anthony. I want to give you our report called Incommunicado, where we illustrate letters that we've written to members of Congress as well as executive branch agencies, which don't even get an acknowledgement, not even the courtesy of acknowledgement, never mind a response to the substance of the letters. And we put these letters in this compendium, and we have your address, and we're going to send you a print copy of the report Incommunicado.
This next question comes from an episode that we did on July 5th with Hassan El Tayeb from the Friends Committee on National Legislation. We were obviously talking about Gaza. And Hannah, why don't you take the question from Bill Frenger?
This question is from user Bill Frenger 8955. They say, thank you, Ralph and friends. Why does Israel have the right to interfere in Congress and domestic affairs in this country?
Well, foreign countries have the right to lobby Congress. They don't have the right to do it in an illegal or corrupt manner, and that's true for anybody who lobbies Congress. Israel, of course, has gone further in penetrating the Congress than any other foreign country in modern history. They have a minder assigned to every member of Congress. In fact, Tom Massey, the Republican who is defying Trump from Kentucky, told an interviewer a few months ago that when he took exception to a certain pro-genocide policy by Israel, when he's in the Congress and he walks up to his Republican colleagues, they hear him out and then they say, I got to check with my AIPAC guy. So that's how detailed. And then you add all the Political Action Committee monies from around the country, and you got an extraordinary grip on Congress that is only now being loosened by a few dozen dissidents who don't like the idea of Congress weaponizing and otherwise providing political cover along with Presidents Biden and Trump for the mass murder of over 600,000 Palestinians, infants, children, mothers, fathers, grandfathers, grandmothers, who had nothing to do with October 7th. Unlike Netanyahu in Israel today, even though a majority of Israeli Jews supported the attack on Gaza and the slaughter, they still excoriate Netanyahu for opening the borders on October 7th. And they also know that Netanyahu bragged about facilitating the funding of Hamas and supported Hamas because Hamas was opposed to a two-state solution, which he is also opposed to.
This next comment comes from our July 12th episode, which we titled Trading Life for Death, which was the title of a report that Public Citizen did. And we featured Robert Weissman on the show, co-president Public Citizen, to talk about that. David, take the comment from Eric Thusen.
Okay. He says, Dear Ralph Nader et al., I have an inquiry not related to this episode, but something I think is important and would appreciate a response to, if you don't mind. Specifically, like all of you, I am convinced we cannot have a government of we the people so long as corporations and the wealthy are allowed, through Citizens United, to dominate contributions to political campaigns by so-called independent expenditures. The rub, however, is how we can end this ill without also outlawing unlimited independent expenditures from laudable citizen groups.
Well, the simple answer is public funding of public campaigns, public funding of public parks, like public funding of public schools or public drinking water systems. And remember, even before Citizens United, there was a lot of commercial money going into campaigns. Citizens United opened the floodgates. There were no limits. They could spend $50 million to defeat some candidate, as long as they didn't coordinate with the candidate's campaign. But that has been a gray area ever since Citizens United, the issue of coordination. So the answer to your question is public funding of public campaigns. That should be a campaign issue every 2 years at the congressional level. If you want a more detailed analysis that is more respectful of the rest of your question, you can go to our website, nader.org, and read my answer in over 35 pages to the notorious Powell Memorandum of 1971, which helped arouse the corporations to mobilize and expand their lobbying pressure on Congress against the emerging consumer, environmental, and worker and health safety groups that had succeeded in getting key legislation against all odds in the 60s and early 70s.
Ralph, if somebody is a billionaire and wants to spend money personally to gin up support for a candidate, it seems to me the First Amendment protects that behavior, doesn't it?
Yes, and they can give so much, a few $1,000s in the primary to a candidate, and then the same few $1,000s for the general election to a candidate. So there are legislative limits, but they still are within the range of being free to exercise what the Supreme Court has called their First Amendment rights. The Supreme Court has ruled that money is speech. And so they don't allow many restrictions. But the big one was Citizens United, where they not only threw money is speech into the reefs, they just allowed now billions of dollars to be given by corporate PACs, either to support or oppose candidates at the national, state, and local level.
So if it's 2024, I'm a billionaire, I don't want to get caught donating to Donald Trump. If I take out ads warning about the border crisis and criticizing Kamala Harris and the Biden administration for allowing all these migrants in, isn't that protected by the First Amendment?
Yeah, you can take out ads. If you form a PAC, you have license to spend endless money. It's easy to form a PAC. Political Action Committee, that's what PAC is.
I just wanted to follow up on the Powell memo and how significant that was, written by Lewis Powell, who he was general counsel of the Chamber of Commerce, later became a Supreme Court justice appointed by Nixon. And the Powell memo was almost a direct response to your work in the consumer movement and your work strengthening government agencies, creating other government agencies like the EPA and, like we mentioned before, NHTSA, and creating all of these think tanks to sort of put an intellectual veneer on rolling back the New Deal and the administrative state. They're kind of going after your life's work, Ralph. I can understand why you're pretty angry about it.
Well, that's part of the routine. You know, there's an advance by citizen groups, and there's the inevitable reaction. The only problem, Steve, is that corporations can operate 24/7, and citizens can't do that. They're usually preoccupied with their job, raising their families. They're not perpetual like corporations. Corporations can deduct expenses. Citizens can't deduct expenses when they fly to Washington to lobby their senators. So there are dozens of unfair differences between the artificial entity called corporations and real human beings, which is why I think my response 54 years later to the Powell Memorandum went into some detail, basically saying you cannot have equal justice under the law. You cannot have a democracy when corporations have equal rights with real human beings under the Constitution. That was a judicially decreed bit of activism here. There's nothing in the Constitution that even mentions the word corporation or company. So it was the way it was misinterpreted by courts and repeated by courts for over a century and a half now. And increasingly, when corporations have equal rights with you people, they have unequal wealth and unequal income and unequal supremacy and control over capital, technology, workers, strategically deciding the levels of pollution, the tax system, the kind of energy we use, the elections, the government regulations. I mean, they're the most powerful factor on these government agencies, even the Department of Labor. You can never have an equal contest using the First Amendment to convince or persuade people. Impossible. That's a defining issue of our time. And the amazing thing, and you'll appreciate this because we talk about the responsible institution here, corporate crime. We name names of corporations. But if you read even the independent magazines, they talk about the damage done to our society almost without mentioning who delivers it, the corporation. So they'll talk about all kinds of harm, but they won't attribute it to corporations, especially true in editorials. Now, they do name companies when there's a recall or something that close, but by and large, corporations get a pass. They're not the central focus of political and economic reform anymore. So we have to come back and ask, who's delivering this corruption? Who's delivering this ripoff of consumers? Who's delivering toxic environment? Who's delivering obstacles to doing something about fossil fuel generated global warming and climate catastrophe? If you don't name the agent that is delivering that, how are you going to ever make the delivery system accountable? You can't. So they have an extraordinary degree of anonymity. I watch the evening news from time to time and the commentary, and listen or watch the Sunday talk shows and see how infrequent they ever mention corporate crime. When Trump declared war on Democratic cities with black mayors, coincidentally, D.C., Chicago, Los Angeles, he talked about crime erupting, hellholes, criminals raging as mobs through the street, and crime is defined as street crime. Well, far more people are killed, injured, and stolen from by corporate crime. We've talked about that in the past. There's no time to go into the details. Go to corporatecrimereporter.com. And the press never says street crime. They just say crime. Well, the main criminal centers in Washington, D.C., in terms of theft and injury and avoidable fatalities, are the White House and the K Street corporate lobbyists on Congress. Hands down. Trump is violating all kinds of criminal statutes, and we know what he's doing to the health and safety programs of the American people in every conceivable manner, cutting, slashing, firing, weakening, and the press ignores that. So you ought to tell the reporters, whenever they use the word crime, use an adjective. It's either street crime or corporate crime. Stop exculpating the biggest source of criminal theft and violence, which is corporate.
Well, that's a perfect segue to take a short break and check in with our corporate crime reporter, Russell Mokhiber. Take it away, Russell.
From the National Press Building in Washington, D.C., this is your Corporate Crime Reporter Morning Minute for Friday, September 26, 2025. I'm Russell Mokhiber. Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut last week released a report, Corporate Pardons, the Trump Plan to Let Corporations Get Away with Crimes. The report reveals how Trump is executing an autocratic pay-to-play scheme that allows corporations that support him to break the law while abandoning his working-class base to face corporate scams and higher prices. Earlier this year, Trump made history as the first president to pardon a corporation, freeing the crypto exchange BitMEX from criminal accountability and a $100 million fine. Murphy's new report exposes that Trump has functionally issued many more pardons through the use of executive enforcement power, usually in exchange for millions of dollars in financial contributions to Trump and his allies. For the Corporate Crime Reporter, I'm Russell Mokhiber.
Thank you, Russell. Welcome back to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. My name is Steve Scrovan, along with Ralph and David and Hannah. All right, this next question comes from the episode where we interviewed John Merriman, the ordinary citizen who, in his retirement, decided to clean up the waste in his neighborhood, especially old tires, and has taken his crusade nationwide. This next comment comes from Jill Goldman, who's quite enervated about it. Jill Goldman says, "Why do citizens have to do this themselves? Granted, people should never trash the land, but the state and federal government should be committed to keeping this country clean and safe. They spend comparatively little money on cleanup, but trillions on bombing other countries. I'm so sick of living in this dump."
All I can say to you, Jill, is well said.
Okay.
That's where the priorities are going. Blowing up places around the world. It's hard to exaggerate the distortion of priorities. One of the reasons Western Europe and Canada have all these social safety nets, maternal paid leave, child care, paid family sick leave, all kinds of support structures for children, as in France, universal health insurance, on and on. They don't have a massive military budget, although the Russian invasion of Ukraine is maybe again start changing that under pressure from U.S.-dominated NATO to spend more on a military budget. But over the years, they've had money to return to the people in the form of these critical social safety services. So, well said. Spread the word, Joe.
I was having a conversation, Ralph, with some friends of mine at dinner the other night who had just come back from Japan. And they reported to me that Japan has virtually no litter, but they also have no garbage receptacles around. People take their litter or take their garbage, they put it in their pocket, and they take it home. So it seems like there's a cultural component to this, that Japan is so clean and they don't even have to have garbage cans around.
No doubt. We've noticed the same thing when we went to Japan. Much more self-disciplined. As a culture, they're much more self-disciplined. On the other hand, that can lead to excessive obedience as well, as we learned in World War II.
So basically, Americans are slovenly and obedient.
Well, let's not get too, let's hold out some hope here. This next comment is from our July 26 episode, which was entitled Doctors Against Genocide with Kamer Hawash Kamerli and Dr. Najal Jabor. And it's from Adriana. So, Hannah, you want to read what Adriana has to say?
Yes. So Adriana says, "Thank you, team, for adding those segments with people doing good things in the world. Sometimes I have to stop what I'm doing just because I start crying, thinking about the people in Gaza and larger Palestine. The human experiment has failed, I say to myself, until I listen to examples of people doing good things or simply beautiful things for the only reason of doing them because they are necessary. Not only resisting fascism, for example. Many are doing that. As for the letter to Obama, he doesn't care. Obama only cares about himself and his quote unquote legacy, whatever it is. He is a coward, just like all the leaders of countries that vote against Israel's actions in Gaza, but continue to support the genocide in the way that actually makes a difference with weapons and continuing trade deals with the genocidal regime.
Speaks for itself, doesn't it? Thank you, Adriana. Spread the word. Talk to your neighbors, members of community. The most accelerated form of free speech is person to person.
And Adriana is a regular listener. We hear from her a lot, and she's an active citizen. This next comment comes from our August 2nd episode, which was entitled Call It a Genocide with Omar Bartov. And we also did a tribute to Morton Mintz in that episode.
This is from Selena Sweet. Astounding to me that it requires the accountant's mind to certify the pathological, sadistic smashing of Palestinians and their material cultural entities as, quote unquote, genocide. Just witnessing the starving children, just learning from hospital personnel, the apparent systematic shooting of people, including children, in specific limbs and men's genitals, hearing the report by the American military man named Aguilar, who witnessed the intentional IDF luring of starving and desperate Palestinians to food distribution centers only to murder them, is proof of homicidal mentality. The depth of horrifying Israeli evil brutality matches the depths and reaches of American hypocrisy, moral vacuousness, absence of integrity and courage, and capacity for an alarming lack of basic empathy and integrity. No wonder if they are so paltry regarding the Israeli mass slaughter, not trusting what they see with their own eyes on TV, that we citizens have chosen the wrong people to make decisions about our climate catastrophe. They are, simply and grossly, incapable and incompetent. How are they not, like Biden and Netanyahu, criminals?
And like others who have your viewpoints, Selena, make sure you convey them at least to a staff of members of Congress, your two senators and representatives, on the telephone. They need to hear it in person from you and others. Not enough just to put it up on a website or on the internet. They need to hear that kind of feedback right into their office on Capitol Hill. And while you're at it, ask them whether they have read the Capitol Hill Citizen. And if not, ask them why not. It's delivered in person to them right from the print shop on publication day. Every congressional office and congressional committee offices.
All right, this next comment comes from our August 16th episode, which was titled The Real Death Toll in Gaza with Dr. Feroz Sidwa. And it's from regular listener Howie Lisnoff, who comments a lot. We appreciate that, Howie. And Howie says, Dr. Feroz Sidwa has all of the necessary facts to substantiate the massive number of non-combatant deaths in Gaza at the hands of Israel, the U.S., and the allies of the U.S. The intent to wipe out a particular class of people, in this case Palestinians, is the textbook definition of genocide. The international rules of war are clear about the crime of crimes, genocide. That's the single most important lesson coming out of World War II, and that is genocide is the crime of crimes. There are other laws of war that apply to the Israel-Gaza war, but they pale when compared to the willful eradication of innocent civilians in Gaza. We could talk all day about proportionality in war and the protection of women, children, and men who are non-combatants, but what is clear here is that the nation founded after the Nazi genocide is itself carrying out a methodical genocide. What can be done to stop this lethal insanity? As heroic students, professors, and men and women on the streets in the U.S. found out in 2024, the U.S., the main supplier of Israeli arms and major supporter of its aggression, will go to extreme lengths in order to criminalize protest here and substitute near silence instead of protest. That's from Howie Lisnoff.
Well, Howie, just to amplify a bit your excellent statement, it does help if the real death count was more reasonably estimated instead of 64,000, which is a Hamas death count by names of deceased. The figure is now over 600,000. There's no time to go into all the details. We've done that on other programs. And that makes a big difference. That's 1 out of 4 Palestinians in Gaza who've been killed by the Israeli regime. And it still leaves the improbable number of 3 out of 4 Palestinians still alive. As Feroz Sidwa said, the vast majority of them are sick, injured, or dying. And the starvation is accumulating the pace of death in recent days. The second is that you notice how the press always sticks in that the Hamas-led attack on October 7th took 1,200 Israeli lives. But they don't say the Israelis do not distinguish between civilians and combatants, as they do when Hamas puts out its figures. They say Hamas does not distinguish between how many were combatants and how many were citizens. Why not? Because the press doesn't seem interested in learning that of the 1,200, about 400 were military soldiers and police, and that 1,600 Hamas fighters were killed when they went into Israel, more than the number of Israelis that they killed. None of that is repeated in article after article. Every article almost that you read about when the figure of Hamas is given, they do not go into the details for the Israeli side.
All right. Our next comment comes from our September 6th episode, which we titled The Right to Exist with Susan Abu-Hawa, the Palestinian author and activist.
This question is from Cheryl, short and sweet. Cheryl asks, I've heard that Israel created and paid Hamas. Your comment, Ralph.
You're quite right, but incomplete. In order to counteract the Palestine Liberation Organization, it's a PLO, a secular group, there was a rising religious group stimulated by fellow Muslims in Egypt. And Israel and the United States, this is in the early 80s, said, you know, if we strengthen this group, and it's a religious group, we will undermine the secular group, the PLO, then headed by Yasser Arafat. And so the U.S. and Israel provided funds and other resources to expand Hamas, which, of course, got out of their control after a number of years. Following that, Netanyahu bragged, for example, in 2019 at a convention of his Likud party, that he has supported Hamas and facilitated funds through Israeli banks from Qatar, billions of dollars, to support the Hamas government and keep them less upset, because Hamas was against a two-state solution, which is also the position of Netanyahu and his Likud party. So the answer to your question is, right from the beginning, the U.S. and Israel expanded Hamas and later funded it and kept it running because it was a useful counterpoint to the Palestinian Authority dominant in the West Bank that wanted a two-state solution. This is not the first time we have funded groups that have turned against us. Look at the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. Look at Saddam Hussein in Iraq. I mean, it happens all over the world, the blunders of U.S. foreign and military empire policy.
On the same theme, Ralph, there's a flotilla heading to Gaza. Do you have some comment on that and what do you expect to see from that?
Well, it's a peaceful flotilla, rigorously peaceful. They've all gone through nonviolent civil resistance exercises. There are over 50 little ships with people from 43 countries. For example, there are Muslim women from Malaysia on one of those ships. There's people from South Africa, people from the United States, Europe, other countries. And as we speak, they're about 8 to 10 days away, sailing on the Mediterranean. And this is what's happened so far. When they were docked in Tunisia, 3 of the boats experienced fire bombs. You can only guess where that came from. The extreme ally in the Knesset of Netanyahu has called all the people on these peaceful ships, quote, terrorists, end quote. They've already bombed Qatar. They're bombing everywhere. They've said they can reach anybody in the world. And so we believe this flotilla is in mortal danger. And there's a resolution in Congress and a letter in Congress to Trump to tell Netanyahu not to harm these people. If they are harmed, it's going to create a massive, utterly massive protest around the world and further erode Israel's entrenchment in the U.S. Congress. So this is a test of the outer limits of Israeli violence beyond their borders. And we can only hope that this flotilla will be received as they received the one weeks ago with the Swedish dissident Thunberg. They unloaded the humanitarian cargo and kept them for a few hours and then let them go and leave the country. The purpose of the flotilla is to break the siege, the illegal siege on Gaza that is starving the people and children of Gaza. No food, no water, no medicine, no fuel, no electricity, no homes, and exposed to constant bombing and artillery in a tiny enclave the geographic size of Philadelphia. That's the purpose of the flotilla. And we'll see whether Trump, who has allowed Netanyahu to do whatever he wants, even worse than Biden, whether he speaks up. There are people in Israel and the United States who know a lot about these things, who think the Israeli regime has a detailed dossier on Trump, including Jeffrey Epstein material, and that is what shut the loud mouth of Donald Trump up during this ghastly mass murder with U.S. weapons and political cover in tiny Gaza.
Ralph, you mentioned a resolution in Congress as well as a letter to Trump. Could you expand on that?
The short letter to Trump, which is being signed by members of Congress as we speak, simply says to tell Netanyahu not to harm people on the flotilla. They're very peaceful people. They're very idealistic people. They are doing what they're doing in the tradition of Gandhi and Nelson Mandela and Martin Luther King. That's all the letter does to Trump. And of course, if he doesn't even do that, you can see they got him in a corner with a lot of bad stuff about him in the dossier. The resolution, as far as we know when we're taping, that hasn't been officially introduced yet, but it may be introduced before this show goes up. The resolution demands the same kind of behavior by the Israelis. Do not harm the people on the flotilla. The flotilla's ships contain humanitarian aid for the people in Gaza. Some food, medicine, diapers, other critical materials. It doesn't amount to a huge amount in terms of tonnage, but symbolically, as a sign of support from people around the world, it's very important that it be unloaded and transferred by the Israelis to Gaza.
Okay, to wrap up here, Ralph, I was watching a report on television where a reporter, seemed like a sympathetic reporter, was asking Donald Trump about how he was holding up in light of the death of his ally, Charlie Kirk. And Trump just kind of said, yeah, I'm doing okay. Hey, look at all those trucks. They're starting to build the ballroom. It's something that America has wanted for 150 years, but has never been able to do. This ballroom. Ralph, what's your take on this ballroom Trump wants to build?
Well, they're starting to cut trees down on the White House and bushes down to clear room for a massive ballroom in glitzy design from Mar-a-Lago land, and it's illegal what he's doing. He is not being authorized to spend any money by Congress on a ballroom. Congress has the exclusive authority over appropriations. So Trump said he's going to raise it privately from his corporate cronies, and if that's not enough, he'll write a check. That was reported on by Jonathan Edwards in the Washington Post on September 16th. Now, that is slam dunk illegal. You cannot have private funding of federal construction, because if you did, you would totally negate the exclusive authority of Congress in terms of spending money for the executive branch budget. You could, for example, say, well, certain warmongering interests want a new kind of weapon, and the Pentagon doesn't want to build it. Okay, we'll just raise money from the excess profits of Raytheon and Boeing and General Dynamics and Lockheed Martin and fund it privately. Of course, you can't do that. That repudiates Congress's priorities of saying, yes, something will be funded, no, something will not be funded. And the press hasn't pointed that out yet. So there needs to be an injunction by a legal group, maybe representing some members of Congress whose authority is being usurped, to build this $200 million monstrosity. Imagine the traditional view of the White House with an added ballroom. Not only does Trump have no respect for the law, he has no taste for the political culture.
Well, think of it this way, Ralph. Could easily be converted into a casino and raise money for the country. Have you ever thought of that?
I wouldn't doubt that he was thinking of that. The guy is gross beyond belief, and he has a lust for self-enrichment based on his position in the White House, which he's doing with the cryptocurrency crowd on steroids. That is a huge scandal pointed out by Peter Baker, the White House correspondent for the New York Times, and others.
That's our show. I want to thank all of you listeners for your questions and your comments. We're going to try to do this a little bit more often to keep everybody engaged. So thank you again for those of you listening on the radio. That's our show. For you podcast listeners, stay tuned for some bonus material we call The Wrap-Up, featuring Francesco DeSantis with, in case you haven't heard, a transcript of this program will appear on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour Substack site soon after the episode is posted.
Subscribe to us on our Ralph Nader Radio Hour YouTube channel. And for Ralph's weekly column, it's free at nader.org. For more from Russell Mokhiber, it's at corporatecrimereporter.com.
The American Museum of Tort Law has gone virtual. You can visit tortmuseum.org to explore the exhibits, take a virtual tour, and learn about iconic tort cases from history.
To order your copy of the Capitol Hill Citizen, Democracy Dies in Broad Daylight, it's at capitolhillcitizen.com. The producers of the Ralph Nader Radio Hour are Jimmy Lee Wirt, Hannah Feldman, and Matthew Marin. Our executive producer is Alan Minsky.
Our theme music, Stand Up, Rise Up, was written and performed by Kemp Harris. Our proofreader is Elizabeth Solomon.
Join us next week on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. Thank you, Ralph.
And listeners, obviously we didn't get to anything but a fraction of your feedback, but we read all the feedback. We're informed by the feedback. So rest assured that even if you didn't get a direct answer on a program such as this, that your feedback is very important. And the more detailed and factual it is, the better off the impact will be by your initiative in getting back to us. You have to be active in a program like this because we're not just talking to the choir here. We want the choir to sing back in affirmation or dissent.
Stand up, step up, step up. You ought to step up. Rise up, rise up. I know you ought to rise up and stand up, stand up. You've been saying, I think you step up. I think that you should step up. Rise up, don't let the system hold you down. Stand up, stand up. You've been saying, step up, I think you should step up. Rise up, and you rise up because you have the power. Stand up, stand up.